So Trump is off to China tomorrow, and there is no resolution to the Iran war. As we know, Netanyahu yesterday smugly told us that the war is not over till they don't grab the uranium. Not many hardball questions were asked by CBS, but of course that is to be expected at this point where CBS's editorial body sits and what their leanings are. So Netanyahu thinks that the problem for Israel and its image in the US right now is all about social media. And if they could only fix the social media issue, then they'll be fine. There's nothing to worry about because Israel practices the highest standards of warfare. And of course, the IDF is the most moral army in the world. And oopsies happen, and shit happens, and people get killed. That's just the way it is. But Israel is the most powerful country and has become extremely powerful, and also says that it's time for the US, for Israel to end its dependency, financial and military dependency on the United States. Of course, he says that in English, but we don't know what he actually says back home in Hebrew. But yes, he thinks that Israel should now wean itself off of US military aid. Wonderful. I'm really glad to hear that, because the 3.8 billion annually that goes to support Israel and its doings, I think would be great if we could spend that here in America on healthcare, housing, and issues such as that. But just in case we don't quite understand what our money subsidizes, let us listen to NPR news report about what exactly is happening on the West Bank. And this is a story that's headlined, Israeli settlers force Palestinian family to exhume and rebury their father. Yes, exhume and rebury their father by digging up the father's grave. And IDF soldiers, the most moral army in the world, stood back and watched while this was happening. So why don't we let NPR, that is on the ground watching this, report what is happening.
Others have dug up the grave of an elderly Palestinian man. It happened in a cemetery near a newly re-established Israeli settlement. The United Nations Human Rights Office for the occupied Palestinian territory said the incident was a, quote, despicable example of the new level of dehumanization of Palestinians. There has been a dramatic increase in settler attacks and Israeli government restrictions in the occupied West Bank. Here's NPR's Ruth Sherlock.
A video filmed at the scene shows the event clearly. The relatives of the deceased Palestinian, Hussein Assasa, quickly carry his body, wrapped in a white shroud, away from the cemetery where settlers, armed with weapons and holding spades, stand beside Assasa's freshly disturbed burial site. We were forced to lift my father's body out of the grave the settlers had been digging up, Mohammed Assasa says. He speaks with us by phone from a tent outside his house, where he's receiving mourners who've come to pay their respects. Assasa says his family has been burying their dead in this cemetery for generations. Then, last year, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's government approved the return to the area of a settlement that had been removed under an Israeli disengagement plan in 2005. Now, settlers live a little over 300 yards from the cemetery. Assasa says his family was told they would now need to obtain permits from the Israeli military to access the cemetery to visit relatives' graves or bury their dead. So, when Hussein Assasa, who was in his 80s, passed away, that's what the family did. The Israeli military confirmed to NPR that the Assasas had coordinated the burial in advance with security forces. Assasa says his family was given 30 minutes to lay his father to rest.
We buried my father, and all the while the settlers were there shouting at us and heckling us and telling us to leave. After the funeral, we left. But not even 10 or 15 minutes later, people came to warn us the settlers were digging up his grave. We ran back to the cemetery. We couldn't believe what was happening.
The settlers had dug all the way down to Assasa's father's body.
The settlers told us, either you take the dead body away right now, or we'll use a bulldozer to remove him from the grave and dump him for you.
He says that despite the family having obtained the necessary permissions, Israeli soldiers at the site did not try to send the settlers away. The Israeli military told NPR its soldiers had confiscated digging tools from the settlers and had remained at the site to, quote, prevent further friction. Assasa shared a video that shows Israeli soldiers standing beside the settlers, looking on. Without support, Assasa says he and his relatives had no choice but to bow to the settlers' demands and exhume the body and take it away. His father was laid to rest in the cemetery of a nearby town, far from his family's traditional burial ground. Ruth Sherlock, NPR News, Ramallah in the occupied West Bank.
Social media is the problem for Netanyahu? No, the problem is what has been permitted to be done to Palestinians, so much so that even their dead cannot rest in peace. What level of inhumanity does it take to dig up the grave of anyone who's just been buried? You're actually watching the families bury their father, and then they go in and they do this. What level of inhumanity and brutality and cruelty does it take? How much of our money is funding this? How many Americans are settlers today? Plenty. Plenty, plenty. So yes, Mr. Netanyahu blithely, smugly says social media is the problem. No, he is the problem. His government is the problem. His policies are a problem. He is a war criminal with arrest warrants out for him. The other problem are Western leaders who watch this, who know about this, who blah, blah, blah about this, but do nothing. Absolutely nothing. They have so contributed to this dehumanization. And that brings me to the leader of the gang, Keir Starmer, who is facing the most huge headwinds. But you know, replacing Keir Starmer with another Keir Starmer is not quite going to do it. But in any case, let us see what is being said about Keir Starmer today. So Yanis Varoufakis was a former finance minister of Greece and has been very, very outspoken and really trends to be one of the most progressive political figures in Europe right now, and in Greece in particular. And let us see what he has just written today about Keir Starmer, and I think it describes Keir Starmer quite well, actually. And this is what Yanis says. Having exorcised from the Labour Party its most authentic voices, people of unimpeachable integrity, such as Ken Loach and Jeremy Corbyn, a purge that eluded even Tony Blair's repertoire, Starmer embarked on a rampage. He slashed disability benefits, armed and fed intelligence to the Israeli government as it executed genocide in Gaza, channeled his own inner Farage, perhaps his inner Enoch Powell, to vilify migrants and treat refugees as vermin, gutted international aid to masquerade as a defender of defense spending, bulldozed wildlife and their habitats, unveiled a new lexicon of draconian anti-protest laws, left trans people suspended in legal limbo, clung with religious fervor to absurd, socially ruinous fiscal policies, allowed Rachel Reeves to squander £100 billion, covering the Bank of England's outrageous and wholly unnecessary quantitative tightening losses, a gift that keeps giving to the city's banks, while imposing yet another round of austerity on government departments and public services. Once the great hope of the downtrodden, Starmer's Labour has become the villain, the genuinely nasty party. Once a human rights lawyer, he has single-handedly plunged Britain into a shoddy, incompetent authoritarianism. I think that describes Starmer and the Labour Party today quite well. Apparently, another Qatar-owned LNG tanker is nearing the mouth of the Strait of Hormuz and has probably crossed the strait. And this is the second successful export of Qatar LNG to Pakistan. So, what we need to know is that 1, it's from Qatar, 2, it's traversing the Iranian designated lane, and 3, it's going to Pakistan. So it seems that the Qatar rapprochement or détente is holding, and that Iran is definitely letting Pakistan benefit from their role as mediator. Today, the spokesman for the foreign ministry says that Pakistan has acted very, very professionally, and they will not talk to the U.S. directly, but continue to do it through Pakistan. So basically, he has debunked all the bullshit about Pakistan leaning too heavily to the U.S. and causing mistrust in Iran, so on and so forth. So he's debunked that. The Iranians also say that they didn't make the counter-proposal to please Trump. They made the counter-proposal in the interest of Iran. And so that is where they stand, and they await more response from the United States. Meanwhile, Trump is embarking on his trip to China tomorrow, and all analysts say that he is going to China as the weaker party. That what China has seen is how exposed the U.S. is militarily as well as exposed economically. So there is that happening. And that Xi Jinping certainly comes out as the more important and more powerful leader in all of this. And China has continued its cooperation, its ties to Iran, including military ties. So there is that. I think what we have forgotten is this whole tariff warfare and what effect that has had on U.S. agriculture. Remember, China was the biggest buyer of U.S. soybeans. And this whole tariff nonsense that Trump embarked on kind of stopped that short. So they are buying U.S. soybean, but not to the extent that China was. And for the longest time, soybean were basically rotting in the U.S. And who filled that gap? Brazil. So, China's economic power continues to rise, whether in South America, whether in the Africa region, whether in South Asia, whether in Europe. So Trump definitely goes to China in a much weakened state. Oil prices, oil futures are hovering around 97, 98 right now because there is a stalemate and there doesn't seem to be a way forward. And I don't think Netanyahu's interview yesterday did any good to the U.S. standing or the U.S. position. Not only did America come off as being subservient to Netanyahu, but now America is coming off as being subservient to Xi Jinping. So this is where we are today, and let us see how the day progresses. But so far, we're not seeing any particular good news for a U.S. standing in the world.